Hello and welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Azam Khan. It has been a year of record-breaking climate disasters for the world, from devastating floods in Pakistan to severe drought and heat waves in Europe, killing thousands and displacing more. It's a symptom of a much larger urgency, which over 90 heads of state and some 40,000 other attendees are faced with this week at the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP27, in Egypt. Last year's summit, bold targets and promises were pledged by countries, with the goal of getting the global temperature below 2 degrees and to financially support communities most vulnerable. However, things have not progressed as hoped, and the window of opportunity is nearly closing. What are the expectations being set this time around? Have geopolitical tensions fractured an already disjointed cooperation on the world's most vital issue? Joining me to discuss this topic is CEO of CarbonCare Innolab, a Hong Kong-based NGO promoting sustainability, Chan-yau Chong. Mr. Chong, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
A lot has happened so far this week at the COP27, and a lot more has yet to come. So as a founder of an institution that does a lot of climate change policy, advocacy, and changes, what are some of the key takeaways of COP27 so far for you?
I think there is a lot of disappointment so far. The process has been slow. The commitment made last year is not being fulfilled. So we really don't have a lot to say. The loss and damage has been put on the agenda, and but not much progress has been made. So I would say people are aware of the problem. The only thing that you can take as positive is that people still commit to 1.5 degree world as a target. And the G20 has reiterated that, and people are saying that that is still the commitment. But the scientists say that if you don't follow up with actions, and this target will be missed. So people are trying to rescue a commitment.
Right. And this year has had a lot of devastation by climate change, as you're aware of, including the floods in Pakistan. And there's been a lot of loss of life and a lot of financial destruction from it. So has the summit been able to address this loss and damage, so to speak, and focus on that financial structuring of how to tackle this?
Yeah, to add to your list, actually not very far away from Egypt, in the Horn of Africa, in Sudan, Somalia, there has been a drought for 4 to 5 rainy seasons without rain. So millions of people are already suffering from lack of food, even many of them at the famine stage. So the leaders have to address that. And many NGOs, people have brought the message there. And I hear one of my students there, delegates that CarbonCare Innolab sent to the conference, reported that they heard how a citizens from one of these countries coming to the conference to talk to people who still talk about food supply schemes and so on, food security framework and that kind of thing. But people are dying. People are so in a way, the urgency for action is very strong. And those who suffer are asking for loss and damage. And it has been put in the agenda, but we are hearing rich countries trying to say, well, no, this is not the kind of language we want. We don't want compensation. We don't want paying for the past emissions that we are responsible for. So you see, Africa, the countries that have least responsible contribution to climate change are suffering the most right now.
Right. Right. The countries that are, like you mentioned, that are suffering the most, the communities that are suffering the most, they're also the ones that are contributing the least to climate change. So how can that be reconciled?
I think the voice need to be heard. The NGOs, we are one of them, have brought the message to confront the leaders. I think narrow interest, short-sighted considerations, all these have to be set aside. So we need a lot of effort, continued pressures for leaders to really take the whole world into considerations. And the priority is that we have only one Earth, we don't have two. So, and the action has to be taken now. The scientists say we just have a very short window to make a difference.
And the former U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, who's also now the climate special envoy to the United States, he proposed a new scheme, a new carbon trading scheme, and it's dubbed the Energy Transition Accelerator, in a bid to finance the decommissioning of coal, and which will help to work with developing countries to enable them to more deeply and more intricately lower their emissions. And he also really focused a lot on, he put a lot of emphasis on the private sector needing to lead the way for reducing emissions. So what is your take on his scheme and on him placing the onus on the private sector?
Well, private sector does have its responsibility in channeling the money. And carbon credit scheme works if it is genuine. So there are several conditions for his scheme to work. Number one, has to be regulations. It cannot be voluntary. And number two, the carbon price has to be realistic. You know, I have been dealing with carbon price, carbon trading, offsetting for past 10 years. And often they're looking for the cheapest carbon credits. And it does not mean channeling real money that developing countries need. And number three is you have to have genuine commitment to reduce carbon. And carbon credits cannot be used for greenwashing. And there is a risk of that. You know, if fossil fuel companies are allowed to shed their responsibility by buying carbon credits, then we are not making the right move. Okay.
Right.
So,
well, that's the problem when you ask the private sector to lead the way, and they'll come up, if they're coming up with the plans, they're going to try and, you know, they're motivated by trying to save money, and I feel like that's kind of counterproductive when it comes to this particular issue.
yeah, but on the other hand, private sector can make a difference. There are genuine attempts to make investment free of carbon defossilization through sustainable investment, and also staff. People who ask for jobs, who look for companies, they can make an influence, and consumer can make a difference, and then regulations can make a difference. So yes, private sectors, that there is a risk, but on the other hand, there is an opportunity.
Right. And with the backdrop of COP27, how does this fit in with Hong Kong's fight to reach its goals of decarbonization, et cetera? And how has it been for you and your work?
Well, which city has been a responsible, important stakeholders. So cities like Hong Kong does have a responsibility. CarbonCare Innolab has been monitoring Hong Kong's performance through what we call a Paris Watch report. And we find the targets still can be not ambitious enough. We have a target of 2050 neutrality. That's good, but we are postponing the 2030 target to 2035. So there is a 5-year difference, but the difference is significant. We need to reduce by half the carbon credits compared to 2010. That's the target set for us by IPCC, the UN scientists, and Hong Kong need to do something about that. There isn't enough language change and policy change. Look at the recent policy address. We are still talking about new infrastructure for growth. We are not talking about infrastructure for decarbonize. We don't invest in renewable energy.
Right.
We're trying to say, well, let's try to do our best. No, we cannot just trying to do our best. We have to do our best.
Right. Mr. Chong, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Don't go anywhere after the break. I'll be joined by expert Dr. Masaru. Stay tuned.